Hi, my name is Andy Page. I'm the hardball captain at Mersey Cricket Club. I'm 46. I don't really want to tell the world that. Originally, I'm from the west of Scotland, but I live in St Helens at the moment.
Yeah, and could you tell me a little bit about Mersey Rose in general, how it was set up, the idea behind the club and when it was set up as well?
Okay, so we set the club up at the end of 2023, but November time. And a number of us who founded the club came out of another cricket club, and we felt that not enough is being done for inclusion in mainstream cricket. There's some very, very good people involved in our cricket clubs across Merseyside, but we felt that if we were an independent club, we'd have the scope to do so much more than to be within the same kind of clubs, having the same kind of arguments with the same kinds of people all the time. Things going around in circles. And there was also the ICEC's report into the state of cricket last year, which found that unfortunately the game in the UK is institutionally racist, institutionally sexist, and institutionally homophobic. And we won't go about transphobia, it didn't really deal with that, but there is an issue in cricket about institutional prejudice. And we felt that we could be well placed if we were an independent club. If we could get some like-minded people who are absolutely dedicated and committed to diversity and inclusion from the outset, we could create something that does things differently, that can be a big part of changing the culture locally, regionally, and perhaps even nationally. So that's how it came about.
And so what's your role at the club? Because I understand you're the captain.
I'm the captain of the hardball team. We have two teams. We have a hardball team, which is going to be playing sort of 40-over matches on Sunday afternoons with a hardball. There's also a softball team, which is aimed more at entry-level players. We have a different captain for that. That's Anna. So I'm the captain of basically the Sunday team. I'm also the club treasurer, so I serve on the committee as well. And I've been one of a number of people that were inspired, shall we say, to found the club. But I wouldn't say I'm certainly not a one-man band. There's a lot of other people that have been part of this effort.
Yeah. And how has it been received in the local community so far? Has there been quite a good uptake?
Okay, so what we found is we've got a lot of interest, certainly from the media. But we also found we've got a lot of interest in other clubs, other organisations. People have been coming to us and asking what we're about, what we're doing, how they can potentially help us. And it's been good to have other cricket clubs contacting us saying, how can we be part of what you're doing? As it suggests that we're doing something right, they recognise that we can be a catalyst for change, and they want to be part of that, and that's tremendous. The challenge we've got is actually getting more players. A small number of us started up the club. We've had a little bit of interest from new players, and that's good, but we need more. And that's the challenge with starting off something new. Until people know about who you are, what you're about, it's difficult. But we have actually got some partnerships lined up with potentially a disability charity and an LGBT charity, and we're going to have dedicated sessions for their clients. And so we're hoping that from these relationships, more people will come to hear about us, come down to training, hopefully enjoy what they're experiencing, and sign up and become players. Yeah.
How many have you got now playing?
We've got about 15, but some of those aren't going to be playing regularly, so we do need a bigger squad, yes. But we started off with nothing really. We're making progress. And we feel that every week we're getting new inquiries, and people want to know what we're about. So we're optimistic that by the start of the season we'll have a pretty healthy squad. Yes.
Yeah, and considering it's only been a few months really.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's quite good. So how important, in terms of the local community, how important are inclusive clubs like Mersey Rose, especially for those people who kind of wouldn't usually feel like they wanted to get involved in sport?
Well, what we found out certainly from the organisations we've talked to, clubs like ours are absolutely crucial. But the problem is they don't exist. Now you go on to Play Cricket, which is a kind of national database website for cricket clubs. They all put their matches and the scorecards on there. All the clubs will tell you that they're inclusive. But what does that actually mean? And to be honest, a lot of clubs don't realise when they're not being inclusive. And I've had discussions with people about the difference between cricket and perhaps other sports like football that I was involved in for many years, and I've talked about how difficult it was, me being out as a bisexual person in football. cricket is different. There is a cultural difference. But I also think that whereas in football you've got organisations like Football versus Homophobia and Kick Racism Out of Football, we don't tend to have those organisations involved in cricket in the same way. And I think a lot of clubs are ignorant to the fact they need to do so much more to be intentionally inclusive and reach out to people who perhaps don't think that cricket clubs are the place for them to be. And you look at cricket clubs that have the kind of the conventional sporting club model. Even myself, as a rather experienced cricketer, I've been playing cricket for 10 years. I don't want to be part of those clubs. I don't feel I fit in there. And if I'm a member of the LGBT community, or I'm disabled, or I'm trans, are these the kind of clubs that I want to go to? Whereas if you have an overtly inclusive club that advertises the fact that it's trans friendly, that it's LGBT friendly, that it's disability inclusive, then hopefully people are going to be more inclined to think, actually, I might fit in there. So what we are finding, certainly from working with a particular LGBT charity and the conversations we've had with them, is there are people that will be receptive to the kind of message that we're sending out that probably wouldn't think of going to a cricket club otherwise.
Yeah. And so the recent statement the club put out about
Yes.
transphobic abuse and homophobic abuse online.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about that and the situation, kind of what happened and what the club are doing?
Yeah, so what happened is we decided, and this is where you can be sometimes naive with social media, we decided to put out a paid advert on Facebook to reach as many people in the Merseyside area as we could. And we put on a poster that basically said what we were about. It said something like, do you love cricket? And listed under that, it said LGBT inclusive, disability inclusive, so on. There was nothing in that I would have thought would be particularly contentious. But again, it was circulated far and wide. Again, the aim was to reach a wide audience, and it did that. But unfortunately, when you reach a wide audience, especially in social media, you get reactions and responses. And some of them were kind of low-level, normal kind of gay jokes, you know. The homophobic stuff was low-level. I'm not saying that's acceptable. Lots of silly jokes about playing in the showers, you know, it's not particularly funny. The kind of stuff that gay and bisexual people have put up with for years, but not overly offensive. However, there were some individuals decided that they would use our post as a means of expressing transphobic hate. And they put on rather graphic memes and some extremely hateful comments, including one person that said, well, we know where you're training now, we're going to come down and target you. And that had to be sent to the police. They continued to post until, I mean, we were acting quickly to take these posts down as soon as they were going up, but it was really quite upsetting. You know, we do have a couple of trans people playing for us. And that is the whole point, actually. We are a mixed team so that it doesn't matter what gender anyone is. We just see cricket players. And both of our teams, the hardball team and the softball team, are mixed. And therefore, there should be it shouldn't be contentious that trans people play for us because we are a mixed gender club. But, you know, this stuff was below the belt. And I say it was quite upsetting for us, and it was an experience that we don't really want to repeat. But sadly, we had to refer that to the police. Fortunately, we haven't had any further responses since then, but it's a lesson to us really that we can't be just putting things out on social media and boosting them for a wider audience, because inevitably we get these kind of reactions, and we don't want our players and members and potential players seeing that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's really sad, isn't it? Because when you think all it was a poster just trying to get people involved in sport.
Yeah, you didn't even say you know, transgender inclusive specifically. You just said LGBT inclusive. Obviously the T's in there with the LGB, and rightly so. But again, it shouldn't be contentious to say that we're creating a new team that welcomes everyone. Yeah. Shouldn't be.
When it comes down to it, you know, it's getting local people involved in sport.
Absolutely.
It's a positive thing.
Yes.
And how can things like that, I'm sure it affects, you know, people's mental health at the club, and to see that online, it must be quite. It
does, as I say, we've got a couple of trans players, and my concern was that they don't see that. But also there's potential players out there. We are trying to reach new players. And if our intended audience sees those kind of comments and we don't react to that, and we didn't put out the kind of statement that we did that expressly supported trans people, then what we're trying to do, which I mentioned earlier, about creating an environment where these people feel welcome, that would all be undone. So it was important for us to respond quickly and immediately, and hence the statement online on our website, saying, you know, definitively that we support trans people and their right to self-expression. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the club, kind of, do you have any plans? I mean, you spoke about how kind of an awareness on what you post on social media, but do you have any plans to kind of combat the issue, or you know, has it changed anything that you're doing?
We're trying to combat the issue, I think, just by being inclusive. I mean, that's the main thing. And we want transgender people playing for us. We want people to know that if they are trans, then there's absolutely no problem coming to us. We won't be asking them any questions. You know, I think there's a real issue in cricket now, especially with the ECB likely to be looking at rules around women's cricket and criteria for playing women's cricket. You know, it's going to open an awful lot of Pandora's boxes. And what we want to say is, well, whatever the ECB decide to do, whatever other clubs do, we are proudly inclusive, and you'll always be welcome with us. And making that statement, I think, is the best thing we possibly can do. But as and when situations arise, then yeah, we'll make statements. We'll be attending Liverpool Pride and so on. You know, we'll be marching in that. You know, if there are trans organisations that want us to support what they're doing, then yeah, we'll be open to that and we'll happily work with them.
Yeah, and yeah. I'm sure you're aware, like you mentioned, that there are some people in society whose opinion is, you know, transgender people, and more specifically transgender women, don't have a place in professional sport, and I think it's really sad. And how would you kind of respond to that opinion?
So there are two ways of answering that. So the first thing I'm going to give you my personal opinion. My personal opinion is that we need to follow scientific evidence. And there are a lot of people that make these assertions without really knowing what it means to be trans, knowing what it's like to take puberty blockers and so on. You know, they don't know what the scientific realities of a trans person's body. You know, things are not biologically as black and white as some of these people would make out. But in terms of professional sport, I can disagree, but I can understand why certain people would like, you know, women's sport to be for non-trans women. I get that. I understand that. And that really isn't a debate for me to get involved with, because my club is not elite, my club is not professional. But from our point of view, as an amateur club, you know, that really doesn't apply. And what we were trying to do is we're trying to take down barriers to inclusion. We're trying to change the culture. And I think what we're trying to say is, look at our model. We are not making distinctions on the basis of gender. You know, why don't more clubs follow suit?
Yeah, and I think
then it becomes irrelevant. It becomes academic.
Yeah. And what do you believe is the most important thing in kind of combating the issue of online abuse and transphobia and homophobia in sport in general? Is it kind of the social media platforms? Is it the government? Is it education?
Education is the key thing, but there are some people that just will hold views irrespective. You know, education matters, but I also think there's a responsibility for social media platforms to step up. 3 years ago, this is completely you know, nothing to do with cricket. 3 years ago, I received some serious homophobic threats on Facebook, and I reported them to Facebook, and Facebook decided there was nothing untoward in these messages at all. Fortunately, the police and a magistrate disagreed, and the person who sent those messages, who was actually backing up their threats, quite scarily, that person served a custodial sentence. But it's interesting that Facebook didn't take any action at all.
Yeah, it makes you question whether they're actually
exactly. So do I have faith in social media channels? No, not really, not really. And they do need to up the game. You know, but for me, education is key. I think we need to demonstrate that some of the more vocal individuals are not necessarily representing the views of the majority of people that they think they are. A lot of these people think they are representing the views of the public. Actually, I don't think the public cares too much whether trans people want to play cricket or not. You know, the narrative has to change, and that's where I think clubs like ours come in, but also other clubs as well. There are a lot of clubs out there in all sports that would like to be more inclusive. They don't necessarily know how to do that, and so certainly in cricket, a lot of them are waiting for a lead from the ECB telling them what to do. But I would also hope that some of those clubs might look to clubs like ourselves Birmingham Unicorns, who are doing a great job in the Midlands in terms of LGBT inclusion. No Boundaries, another Midlands club that's doing a lot of work for disability and women's inclusion. And clubs might look to us and think, look, you know, you're an inspiration for us. What can we learn from you? So I think we've all got a role to play in educating.
Yeah, and having a willingness to learn as well, you know, from other clubs' point of view as
Yes.
well. So the Her Game 2 partnership that's
Yes.
just been announced,
Yes.
tell me a bit about that, how that's come to be and what it's going to mean for the club.
Okay, so I'm probably not the best person to talk about this because it's Anna's initiative. Anna's our softball captain, and she became aware of Her Game 2 last year. Now, Her Game 2 started off with a group of women involved in football that felt that football wasn't really a very safe space for them to be themselves, express themselves. They encountered a lot of prejudice, and they created a campaign to make football a better place for women. And over the last 3 years, it's an astonishingly short time, that has moved into cricket as well, and I believe other sports. So Her Game 2 basically exists to educate. You know, it's about, again, changing a culture. It's about making sports clubs more alert to the needs of women, female players, female members, female supporters. And it's got a lot of following now among the professional community. A lot of professional cricket clubs have signed up to Her Game 2. A lot of professional football clubs have certainly, not just signed up to Her Game 2, but they're running events for Her Game 2, which is terrific. It's such a short time, they've got such great recognition. The challenge is on grassroots level, to make sure that our grassroots sport clubs are as inclusive as I think some of us say we are, especially in regards to women's involvement in the game. And that means women at all levels of the club, whether it's playing, supporting, being on committees, volunteering, that they are involved in the full life of the sporting club. And certainly at Mersey Rose, we want to be part of that. It's a great initiative. We believe in its values. I think they're quite interested in what we're doing as well. And we're looking to work very closely together to have this dialogue and to make sure that you know, women are included in what we do. I mean, a lot of cricket clubs, and I've seen this from my own experience, is the women's section is distinct and separate. It's kind of a club within a club. Women are not necessarily involved in the committees. Women are over there somewhere, and that's got to change. What is also good about Her Game 2 is it's trans-inclusive, and that mattered to us quite a lot. We wouldn't want to be joining Her Game 2 if it was repeating the normal kind of arguments about safe spaces for women without including trans women in those conversations. So we believe that it's an organisation that we should support going forward, and we're optimistic that this can actually help include women in cricket in Merseyside.
Yeah, in a more general sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as women's sport, it's an interesting one because if you go back to the Victorian era, there was just sport. There wasn't men's sport and there wasn't women's sport. And this became a problem when a lot of the Victorian men didn't like the idea of being beaten by some of the women. And it came to a head in football because women were playing football and doing very, very well. There's some big women's teams. And there was a player, I think she played for Portsmouth Ladies. I could be wrong. But certainly Portsmouth wanted to sign her. Her name was Ada Anscombe. And she was so good that Portsmouth offered 2 of their male players in return for her. Quite how 2 male players could play for Portsmouth Ladies, I'm not entirely sure. But the FA wanted to do something because women's sport was getting good. It was getting recognised. And this idea that women and men might just play together was too much. And so they used these pseudo-scientific arguments against women's inclusion. Women's bodies weren't developed and adapted. They used pseudo-Darwinism. Basically, women weren't evolved. They didn't have the bodies to be able to play competitive sport. And eventually it led to banning football altogether. And for 50-odd years, women were not allowed to play football. They were at least not under FA auspices. Different in cricket. There always was women's cricket, but I think most people wouldn't even have been aware of it. And the point is that women's sport was never created as at the same time as men's sport. That you had men's sport and you had women's sport, and the idea was that you have 2 playing fields that are supposedly level. Women's sport was not created to make life better for women. It was created to stop men being embarrassed. That the history books will back that up. Now, there is an argument about, equality in sport, that perhaps sport should be a level playing field. That's a very, very new argument. But if you're going to do that, let's have a look at the Olympics. And let's look at the Paralympics and the amount of categories they have there, and the amount of categories that are actually necessary to ensure that for disabled people playing sport, that playing fields are broadly level. Now, if we look at the Olympic sport, which is just male and female distinctions, look at those categories. And we take something like swimming. Right, you have these great swimmers in the past 20 years, like Ian Thorpe, Michael Phelps. These are extraordinarily advantaged people, physically. And if you think that sport is level, then you've got another thing coming, because these people are, even other elite swimmers can't compete with them because their bodies are not the same. And then we have this the situation with Caster Semenya, a South African athlete who is clearly female. But things biologically are not always black and white. And there are people who would exclude her from sport. Why? Just because she doesn't fit your gender binary? Just because her biological makeup is a little bit different? It's not a fault of her own. It's natural.
And everyone's biological makeup is
Absolutely.
different.
And that's the point. Everybody's biological different. We can't all be Ian Thorpe and Michael Phelps. We don't all look like that. The idea that just a gender binary somehow keeps sport fair, for me, is ludicrous. If you want sport to be fair, then let's look at creating more categories. Based on gender, absolutely. But other factors as well, other physical factors. Because if you're obsessed with physicality, if you're obsessed with people's biology, you have to accept that there's so much variance out there that a simple black and white, male, female, binary way of thinking just doesn't cut it.
And kind of moving forward for the club in general, do you have any plans to specific plans to grow and develop? I'm sure, partnerships like this you'll be hoping that they increase membership in the club, but
yes.
Sort of the plans to make the club even bigger?
Well, we think if we ally ourselves with organisations like Her Game Too, it sends out a very clear signal that we're interested in women's inclusion. And hopefully that will mean that more women are interested in becoming part of what Mersey Rose is. It's not rocket science. It's quite straightforward. But we also think it's the right thing to do. We want to ally with organisations that share our values, share our views, that are promoting inclusion in perhaps sometimes a different way to us. We're looking at partnerships with other organisations, and I can't really talk about them in depth, but we're hoping that as we develop these partnerships and these understandings with different organisations that are pursuing inclusive agendas, and that will have a positive effect on, firstly, the way we're seen in our community, the way people understand inclusion, because often inclusion is somewhere out there. These organisations are out there, they're doing things, but they don't see it as relevant to sport. But also, hopefully, we'll see a lot of people that are associated with those organisations wanting to get involved in who we are, and perhaps want to play for us, volunteer for us, be on our committee, and so on. Yes. Yeah.
And do you think Mersey Rose people seeing, what you're doing in the local community, do you think it will inspire more different sports, to kind of set up inclusive teams and clubs?
Yeah, well, I already know that there's a gay man in the Midlands that is looking at setting up an LGBT club because he's been inspired by the development of inclusive clubs and the network that's there already. Birmingham Unicorns is based in Birmingham, obviously. There's a team called Graces that's based in London. There's a team called Leeds Kites that's just been formed in Leeds, and there's ourselves. And I think people are already looking at that and thinking, this is interesting. It started off with Graces, who led the way a few years ago, then Birmingham Unicorns became the second team. And all of a sudden now there's at least 4 of us on the scene, and others are looking to replicate that. So I think even nationally, we're making a difference already. But on a local level, I do hope that other clubs look at us and think, we could be doing something like that.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, we wouldn't exist. But of course, we don't live in an ideal world. And in an ideal world, There are a lot of other clubs out there who want to be inclusive, that recognise after that report last year there's a need to be inclusive, and they don't know how to do it. And of course, in an ideal world, there'd be people out there showing them what to do, giving them advice. The ECB would have initiatives up and running to do so much more than it's currently doing. But these things take time. Now, gradual change is still change, and it's positive. But I don't expect anything radical or revolutionary to come out of the ECB anytime soon, or the FA, or the governing bodies of other sports. And in the meantime, I think it's left to clubs like Birmingham Unicorns, Leeds Kites, Graces, ourselves, I think to stand up and show what inclusion looks like.
Yeah. And I just wanted to ask you about, I saw online there was a recent study, they found that 80% of people believed that gay people are not accepted, or not, at least not fully accepted within sporting culture. And with that in mind, is it important that LGBTQ plus clubs and inclusive clubs in general create a safe space for people in the community to kind of get involved in sport?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is for two reasons. Now, I mean, that's a sad statistic, but it isn't remotely surprising. Now, different sports have different cultures, and I don't think I'm not saying there's not a problem in cricket, but I think it looks a little bit different. I can't imagine that there are too many spectators in the stands at Old Trafford or Lords or the Oval who are going to be shouting homophobic abuse at players. But again, at grassroots level, even at elite level, there haven't been that many out players. And that's got to change. And it would appear that a lot of LGBT people, certainly the lot that I know, that just don't think that sport is at all friendly, is at all inclusive, that is at all the right kind of place for someone like them. And we want to change that, because I think sport should be absolutely for everybody. And cricket is one of those games that really should be for everyone. So I'll just tell you a little story about a situation that happened to me playing cricket in 2019. So what happens in friendly cricket is, a lot of the time they don't have umpires. So the last person out serves as an umpire for a little while, and then somebody else gets out and then they change over, that kind of thing. And I was opening the batting and I was out early, so I put on a rainbow shirt that I'd been wearing the previous day at Pride, just to distinguish me from others wearing whites. And a lot of the players were from the opposition team. They took that as a cue to come out with a lot of silly homophobic jokes. Oh, we don't have any queer decisions today. And, oh, I'm in a gay mood, and all this kind of thing. And it went on all afternoon. They were relentless. And it was just very unpleasant. Lots of silly jokes about holes and balls, and, no, it's not funny. Can we just focus on the cricket, please? So after the game, I talked to our club chairman at the time, which is a different club, not Mersey Rose, and I said, look, this isn't a nice experience. We haven't enjoyed this. And he said, let me have a word with their chair. I'll see what we can do. And he came back and he said, their chair just dismissed it. He said it was just banter. It wasn't important. So I'll tell you what you should do. Don't play them next year. We're going to cancel the fixture. They're not taking any responsibility for their actions at all. And that was a huge thing. That was a huge moment, because I realised that somebody was taking this seriously. And that he recognised that there should be no place for any kind of homophobia, whatever kind of level, however much it's passed off as banter and just a joke. That shouldn't be, that shouldn't be experienced, in cricket. And it's the kind of experience that I think that if you're new to a club and you come out and you experience that, and you're gay or bi, that's not very welcoming. You don't not necessarily want to go and turn up next week. You certainly won't want to play that opposition again. And so there is a responsibility in clubs, I think, to make sure that when people are LGBT, and we know they're LGBT, that we make sure that our club environment is as friendly as it possibly can be, and that we're able to meet their needs. Yeah.